How does something like this happen? What sets up?
That's one thing we're going to say. You know, it happened because the state was complicit. They knew it was going to happen. The local army commander was a general, knew about it. Cabinet secretaries in Malacanang knew about it because the local politician involved, Toto Mundadatu, complained that there were threats against him, that there were information that it was going to be ambushed, which is why, in fact, he did not file personally his certificate of candidacy.
Right.
Why he sent his wife.
Because he
And,
thought in Muslim law they would respect
yes.
him.
And so he told Malacanang about it, the palace about it, and they didn't do anything other than to try to convince him to desist from standing for election. No? So at that point, you can see very clearly that the state itself is complicit, plus the fact that the killings itself were perpetrated by soldiers, policemen, and elected officers, because the Ambatuans are all elected executives. No? They are state agents. No? So without a doubt, not only is there complicity, but the acts of the killers are all attributable to the state. So this is a killing perpetrated by the state. Although Malacanang wants to portray it as really a tribal war of sorts, no?
Right.
The reality is it is the state that is responsible for the massacre.
Because it was government troops that were used to kill
Government
people.
troops, government arms, government bullets, government officials. That's the fact that they were complicit, they knew. Are we on already?
Yeah.
Yes, we're on already, no?
If, but in Mindanao, or how do you say that,
In Maguindanao,
Maguindanao, that civilians were deputized to help quell uprisings of communist and Muslim extremists, so the government deputized some civilians, is that right?
correct. But that is also the power relationship between the national government and the Ampatuans. See, the Ampatuans have long been the allies of the Philippine government in the armed struggle against the MILF. And that is why they were given access to arms, they were given the bullets, and they have been given government largesse.
But was it just those deputized people that were responsible for the killing?
They
There was
were
also
regular army,
regular
people, policemen. In
as well
fact,
as
majority of them were policemen. No? Regular policemen of the autonomous region.
Not deputized.
Not even deputized.
right.
There's a whole lot of people who were deputized, but then an equal amount of people were actually agents, no? Because they were policemen and regular soldiers. Now, even the deputized ones under international law are properly state agents because there was a collar of authority vested on them. No? They were supposed to be auxiliary forces, but whether be it under humanitarian law or under international law, they are state agents of the Philippines.
Do you think that anyone who opposes the government is labeled a terrorist by the government?
That has been the trend. No? I have been writing about terrorism in the Philippines, and my conclusion has been they have conveniently labeled enemies of the state as terrorists. Whereas the real terrorists are made to escape from high security compounds within the command center of the Philippine National Police itself.
Right. That's a third that escaped from jail, but they really didn't
Yes.
escape. They were let
They
go.
made him walk. No?
Right.
And
I
this
saw the
was,
film from Rex. They
Correct.
showed the film of them.
and he was a confirmed GI guy, and yet he just walked in the very in the national offices of the Philippine National Police in the high detention facility within the command of the Philippine National Police. No? So you can see that when it's convenient, they use the fight against terrorism, no? But in reality, they're advancing a political agenda.
The U.S. government gives around $135 million in aid this year to the Philippines, and I think 2/3 of that goes to Mindanao. Do you know about that?
Well, I don't know if American taxpayers know that part of the aid that they give the Philippines, military assistance, were used in this massacre.
Right.
There were arms provided only by U.S. arms suppliers that were used against the victims of the massacre. And for some reason, many of these U.S. supplied arms also found its way to the arsenal of the private army of the Ampatuans. And of course, the question is, how could it get to them if not because of the fact that the Philippine government gave them? So, American public need to know that their taxpayers' money are being used in a manner to kill and massacre innocent civilians in Mindanao in particular.
Mm-hmm. But one reasoning from our government is that the money is to go help fight terrorism. but the way terrorism is defined by the government is anybody who's opposed to the current government is labeled as a
That
terrorist.
is correct, no? It's a self-serving definition of terrorism, when in reality, it is the state itself that perpetrates acts of terrorism, as in fact, this Maguindanao massacre is one of the worst forms of state-sponsored terrorism.
It's the worst. Reporters Without Borders have declared it the worst
Attack against journalists worldwide.
journalist ever, right?
Yes. Well, the American public need to know that they had a hand in the single most murderous event that led to the most number of deaths of journalists in recorded history.
Did you see the U.S. resolution passed by the Congress?
Yes, I did see that,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm happy to note that in fact they saw the same kind of importance that we have been espousing in the Philippines, particularly on the need to gather physical evidence, forensics evidence, and to bring the perpetrators of this injustice, of this massacre to justice. What it does not address is the fact that the Philippine government itself is not only complicit, but is directly responsible for this massacre. And of course, I have a suspicion that politically they did not highlight that fact because they would have to explain in turn why American supplied troops were used by the Ampatuans in the region of Maguindanao.
It says that journalists won't be allowed at the trial, but they can watch from monitors outside. Is that still true?
No, they have accredited about 30 journalists to report on the proceedings, although we have manifested that we will join the communication of the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines in their desire to allow live coverage of the proceedings. We do so because our clients are journalists, and of course we believe in freedom of the press as well as the supremacy of freedom of expression. I think that people have a right to know, to watch specifically the conduct of the public prosecutors so they can make their own conclusions on whether or not this is a sham proceedings or simply a case of incompetent prosecutors.
Right. And will you play any role in the trial?
Well, we are there as private prosecutors. We have been attempting, with the limited role that we have, because under the Philippines we have a unique system where the commission of a criminal case and the filing of a criminal case gives rise to two cases. One, the criminal case where the state is the defendant party, and a civil case where the victims stand as the plaintiffs.
Mm-hmm.
And so technically our participation is only as to the civil aspect of the case.
The civil aspect.
But in whatever little ways we can, we have been trying to interject questions that would prove at least identity of the victims whom we represent. We represent right now 13 families of journalists who were victims of the massacre. And so far we have had very little success because so far the state has been keen on proving the murder of the two relatives related to the politician victim, but they have done very little to prove the murder of everyone else. Although this is only bail proceedings, the problem though is that in bail proceedings you reproduce automatically the evidence presented there for the evidence in chief. And our worry right now is that at most we have been able to prove only the murder of 3 individuals, 2 of the Mga Dato victims and 1 journalist out of 58 victims. Number 2, we're not even sure if what the state has proven so far is the crime of murder or homicide, because in the first testimony of the forensic specialist or forensics doctor, the defense did a very good job in discrediting the testimony of the medical legal officer, so much so that I think we have not been able to prove cruelty or any of the qualifying circumstances for murder. So right now what we have is a possible conviction, 3 counts for homicide, not even murder.
And why can't you?
But that's why I'm beginning to think that there's really not there is no determination on the part of this administration to bring the Ampatuans to justice.
What about the 100 people that were supposedly arrested by the order given to arrest 100 military
Well,
people?
you see, they were arrested for rebellion, but that weakens our case tremendously, because in the Philippines we have jurisprudence which says that murder is absorbed in the crime of rebellion. Now, I do have to make a declaration that I am one of those who challenged the legality and constitutionality of the declaration of martial law. And the argument that we use in the Philippine Supreme Court is that there are now two grounds by which a president can declare martial law, which are rebellion and invasion,
Right.
and neither of them are present.
Right, so she introduced it illegally because it wasn't rebellion
Correct.
or
And
invasion.
that is why, in order to sustain her declaration, her unconstitutional declaration of martial law, she has had to charge 100 of them with the crime of rebellion. That has the effect of weakening our case because we open our attack now from the defense to argue that the deaths of our clients and the charges for murder are all absorbed by rebellion. Secondly, rebellion is a political offense which may be the subject of amnesty. No? And of course, none of the victims are willing to concede that the killings of their loved ones were in any way political in nature.
So your perception is that impunity is the goal of the administration?
Well, yes, no. I'm saying that Ampatuan is unparalleled in terms of its cruelty and barbarity, but it is also a very typical case study of why there is impunity in the Philippines, because it is the state that is responsible for impunity to begin with, and it is the state that ensures that those behind these acts get away scot-free. Okay.
I think that's most of the questions
Rommel,
I have.
it's
Okay.
directly on the
Okay, he
field,
was
so you
there.
can talk about what
Okay,
you saw
wonderful.
as part of the investigation. Please, would you care to have some choknat? It's a local candy.
Thank you.
Taste it first if you like it.
Thank
okay?
you.
Can I get you tea or coffee?
I think I will have some coffee.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Harry.
Sure.
What's the best way to keep up on the trial? I noticed there was something on like the 8th page of the local paper, but I know CNN's done some reports. but-
What I can do is I can put you in our mailing list so I can update you.
Oh, the
regularly.
on the email
We have-
list? Or?
Yeah, we have an
Okay.
e-group on Southeast Asia Media Defense because that's the network that we are representing in all this. Now, we're the
Okay.
Philippine member of the Southeast Asia Media Defense Network. Okay, so I can include you there. Okay,
Great.
I'll get coffee.
Okay. So you visited the site,
Yes.
and what did you see when you went to the
In
site?
fact, I was one of the first lawyers from outside government to be there within 2 days of the massacre. I was there. I was tasked because we belong to the Center for International Law, and one of our main advocacies would be free expression. So when we had in another case we had an oral argumentation before the Supreme Court on the day that the massacre happened. Right after we finished arguing before the Supreme Court, I was asked by Harry to fly to Maguindanao because I'm from the area. I'm from
Okay.
neighboring General Santos City, which is like the center for everything. So I
Okay.
was fielded there, and my task was to look at how government was doing its duty to investigate the proceedings. So I had with me a local forensic expert who has been working in the field of exhumations for extrajudicial killings for the longest time, Dr. Ben Molino. He's a very experienced investigator of human rights violations. And we were together, we went there. Well, principally, we did the rounds of the morgues where the victims were taken. And he was the one who did the observation on how the autopsies were being conducted. And we determined, we saw with our own eyes how government was very negligent in its duty. There was just not enough facilities, no refrigeration facilities, for instance. And then the police investigators, they took a long time to recover the bodies. And then they allowed many people to trample on the crime site. There was no restriction, there was no proper cordoning off of the crime area, so that there was a lot of instances of contamination.
So were some people beheaded? Was that accurate?
Yeah, the initial report said that some people were beheaded, but apparently that's because of the manner in which the bodies were disposed of. They were thrown into mass
I
graves,
see.
and then, well, of course,
So they
high-powered,
may have dismembered
high-powered,
them to get them
yes,
in the grave.
high-powered firearms were used, high-velocity bullets, and some had wounds that, very some were hit in the neck, and that almost decapitated them.
I see.
But there was, I saw one autopsy report. I think it belonged to the, it was on the autopsy done on the body of the sister of Mayor Magunda Dato, and she was slashed on the chest with a bladed weapon.
Mm.
But you know how they dug up the graves? They used a
Thank you.
backhoe, a huge backhoe.
And is that like a dirt?
Yeah, it's like a machine, earth moving
digs
machine,
dirt,
yes,
right.
a backhoe.
And they use
That's
that,
that's what they used to dig up the mass graves. So you can
Okay.
imagine.
and it was premeditated. It was there before they arrived, you think?
Yeah, they used the backhoe to dig up the graves and to cover it up. In fact, but there were 3 graves. In one of the bigger grave, they dug the bodies, and then along with the three cars, and then they made the backhoe run over the grave that was covered with earth to make sure that it's compacted. So
They tried to bury the vehicles as well?
yeah, they buried the vehicles as well in the last grave, the 3rd grave. That was.
What about the women being raped
There were, according to the police investigators, 5 of them were raped.
or raped?
Well, at least there was presence of sperm
Okay.
in the private areas, private parts, so that you can reasonably infer that they were raped.
What is your hope in terms of the trial? What do you hope will be accomplished? What would be the best scenario?
Well, I really share Harry's observation. I'm always there at the trial from start to end, and we see how it seems to us that the prosecutors are not doing a good job. And that's really our limitation. We try to do what we can to help them, but they run the show. And in fact, whenever Harry tries to raise a question, the defense would object to him, and they say that he is, if the state prosecutors allow him to ask questions, then that means that the state is abdicating its role to prosecute the offense. So they would always raise that question.
So is Cortez the one is she the trial judge?
The judge, Solis Reyes, Judge Reyes.
Okay. There was,
That was the first judge who was assigned to hear the case, and he declined
he
to hear it
inhibited himself.
because he said,
Jocelyn Solis
yeah,
Reyes.
he's the current. She's the current judge hearing the case. The first
Okay.
judge was
Removed himself
Cortez,
for fear
yes,
of.
he declined to hear
Right.
the case because he said he has had enough aggravation because before he handled a very controversial case where he survived an ambush.
Right. So is part of the reason impunity exists is because people are afraid if they oppose or
Yes.
speak out, they're going to be murdered or
In
taken out in
fact,
the middle of the night? Or,
yeah, that's true. In fact, the Philippines has a very high rate of lawyers and judges being killed in the course of a trial. We have a worrying number of judges and lawyers being murdered with impunity. In fact, Harry was one of those who was asked to testify in international fact-finding investigation carried out by the lawyers, 4 lawyers based in Amsterdam, to investigate that phenomenon of impunity directed at legal professionals in the Philippines.
Is there anything that the United Nations can do to?
Well, one of the avenues we're trying to use is the UN system. You can report, you can ask the Human Rights Council to compel the Philippines to make a report because there's a periodic report system for the UN, and each state party is asked to do a report on how it's been carrying out its obligations under relevant human rights treaties. There's also the Human Rights Committee. That's also a mechanism to compel the state to abide with its obligations under the relevant human rights covenants.
Is the Human Rights Commission part of the government?
The commission, you mean in the Philippines?
Commission on
Yeah,
Human
it's
Rights.
an independent constitutional body. In fact, we have been working with the CHR in this case. We were deputized by the Commission on Human Rights to conduct a parallel investigation. That's when we brought in experienced UN experts.
You brought in United Nations experts
Yes,
to
they
the
work
crime
in.
scene.
Yeah, they work in the tribunals, Rwanda and Yugoslavia.
Okay, okay.
Dr. Baraybar
Right.
and Chris Cobb Smith, who's also a field investigator. He's a British national, while Dr. Baraybar is from Peru, and he was also the guy responsible for the conviction of Mr. Fujimori for human rights violations in Peru.
So in the best case scenario, what would be your hope? Would it be that the state is
Well-
charged with homicide?
Our hope is that what we want is that he will be convicted of multiple murders. I mean, the suspects,
The-
the Ampatuans,
Will
That-
be convicted?
yes, of multiple murder. That's what we want.
Okay.
But at the rate we're going, the prosecution is going, we might not be able to reach that goal, given the way they have been handling the trial so far.
Why are the prosecutors not handling it very well?
We don't know, but
Were they appointed by the state? The
Yes,
prosecutors appointed
under
by
our
the state?
system, it's the state prosecutors who are the lead lawyers to prosecute criminal offenses.
Well, do you think there could be a fear on their part that if they get them convicted, their lives could be in danger? Or, I mean,
I don't think that's a consideration here.
it's just they're having a hard time.
Personally, I was in a meeting with the Justice Secretary, and she told me that I should stop talking about the case and start working with the prosecutors. And when she learned that we are working with the CHR, she also asked me why we are working with the CHR. She said, what if the CHR arrives at a different conclusion from our own conclusion about the case? What does that mean? They want to silence us private prosecutors.
Mhm.
I told her, the CHR is an independent constitutional body, you
Right.
know that, you're the Justice Secretary. And it is the duty of the CHR to do its own investigations,
Right.
regardless of what the state has already conducted or what the state is
Right.
currently doing.
Right. So it's an independent investigation.
Yes, it is.
And let's say you come up with homicide and murder with state complicity. That's what you come up with the Human Rights Commission. Then what does the Human Rights Commission have any power to do anything about that, or
Well,
is it just
Right
give
now,
the report?
right now, one of the most important functions that the CHR is doing is to monitor the compliance by the state of its obligations under international law, the relevant covenants to which it is a state party. And that for us, that's already very important because it's the Commission on Human Rights that has the duty to make reports to the UN system. It prepares all the reports. And if